5 plus 3 is 8 root of 2 minus 2. Okay, and that's our answer.
Welcome to Teachers Care Society, the podcast that talks about all news and development in the educational field. We have a good show for you today as I'm joined by Jeremy Hansuvadha, a high school math lead teacher from Southern California, as we'll be discussing inequality in math for students of color and changing the math structure during this pandemic. So without further ado, let's jump right in. All right, welcome back. Our first guest for today is Jeremy Hansuvadha, a curriculum math teacher from Southern California. Welcome to the show, Jeremy. And first of all, how are you doing? How are you handling teaching during this pandemic?
Thank you for having me. It's hard to, right now I would say I guess I'm doing well. It's hard to say though. I mean, it feels like with the pandemic, it feels like a roller coaster. So right now I'm doing probably the best I've felt all school year, but August was pretty rough for me. So I'm glad it's going better now. How about you?
Doing good. Just trying to survive. Before I was, trying to swim with ankle weights and an anchor attached to me. But now I think I'm doggy paddling. I'm still not, Michael Phelps style, but I'm barely doggy paddling. So little by little.
That's funny that you use that analogy because my first year teaching, I felt like I was just trying to keep my head above water. And then my mom, who's a teacher, said that it'd get easier in the second and the third year. And it did to some degree, but I still feel like, even pre-pandemic, that every year it still feels like I'm just trying to keep my head above water for the next day. So the pandemic has not made that any easier, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess the good thing part is, how athletes, they train running with those parachutes. And then when they run without the parachutes, they're much faster. So hopefully that's the way I view it once this pandemic's over. Like, teaching, brick and mortar in person should be a breeze.
I hope so, man. I hope so. I feel like that's part of the nature of our job is just dealing with a lot of stress, just constant stress. You know what I mean? Like that's just kind of the nature of the job.
Yeah. So just managing stress is a game, but let's jump right back in. So one quick look at your resume, and it's quite obvious that you love math. You've been teaching it for high school and even at the university level. And I also see that you had 2 summers where you were in charge of a school summer and after school program for pre-K to second grade. So that's a big change from the following years teaching math in high schools and at the university level. So how was it teaching math to the little ones?
It was pretty awesome. I've been fortunate to teach at 7 different schools in my career. I started in South Carolina where I grew up, and then I moved to Seattle for grad school. And I taught for 3 years in South Carolina, and I wanted to teach in Seattle. I had, even checked out some schools there. And then the month before I moved to Seattle, the No Child Left Behind Act went into effect, and that revoked the reciprocity that South Carolina had at that time with the state of Washington. So my teaching credential was no longer valid. So I was unemployed for a while. And then I got a job at the school called the Happy Medium School in Seattle, which was like the best job ever. I got paid minimum wage, but at that point, I was unemployed, so I was happy to take anything. But it was such a great job just because the school had just such a completely different philosophy in terms of the way it viewed education. And teaching young kids was incredible. It was kind of funny because I was 25 at the time. And, so I was still really young, and I asked the kids, I had a group of kindergartners and a group of second graders, and I asked them how old they thought I was. And they said, just kind of asking the kids, and they were like 59, 78, and all these kids across both classes, the youngest anyone thought I was like 51. And I could not figure it out. And then later on, I realized it was because I was the tallest person in the school. And so they thought because I was the tallest, I was the oldest. And, with little kids, that makes sense, right? Their concept of age is so correlated to their concept of height. But it was just such a blast. Little kids have so much energy, and the school was really cool about that's where I kind of first learned about restitution and restorative justice in terms of education. And so that really taught me a lot as a parent and as a teacher. I love working with that age group, and at some point I would like to go back. I feel like, when I was 25, I felt like my age was an asset to me in high school, because I felt like I could relate to high school students. But now that I'm middle-aged, my age isn't really an asset anymore in that same way. And so I would like to go back to elementary at some point, but when I'm ready for that challenge. I need to learn a lot. It's hard. So.
Yeah. Now, Jeremy, both you and your partners are both educators, and I know you have 2 little girls. So who teaches math at home? Does it, when you teach math, does it bring you back to your teaching pre-K to second grader days?
Well, to be honest, actually, when I was at that school, I wasn't a classroom teacher per se. Again, I was unemployed, so I was just happy to take any job that I could get. And at that point, I was a lunch teacher and did the after-school program. So when how the teacher goes out to eat their lunch, and so I would come in and take over the students, so the teacher could have a moment to eat and eat in peace. And so it was my job to make sure that the kids would eat their main course and clean up their spot and all that stuff. So I didn't actually do any math instruction at that time. So I don't have any formal training at all, and even really experience at the elementary level. Whereas my wife does. She worked in elementary school for 5 years, so she has more experience, and she does the overwhelming majority of the kind of work with the kids, especially right now during distance learning. I'm with my students all day, and so I don't have that space. Whereas as a university professor, she has a little bit more space for that. I try to help, here and there, but I don't think I don't think my children like dad helping so much because, I ask a lot of questions, and I want them to make sure it's not about doing the work, it's about understanding the work. So I think I can be kind of difficult at times.
Well, at least you admit that part. But how was your experience with math growing up? Did you know that you wanted to teach math, or was there another subject that interested you?
Well, like I said, my mom was a teacher growing up. She was a special ed teacher. Actually, she was the special ed teacher of the year for the state of Tennessee, the first one ever, in fact. And my dad was a math ed professor. So I only knew teaching when I was a kid. So that, I didn't know what it was like to have another job, like an office job or, construction job or any, business job. I didn't know about that world. So teaching was kind of all I knew. And I have 5 younger siblings. And so I was kind of, as the oldest of all the siblings, I was kind of, teaching a lot, or just, I thought I knew everything basically. So that was, I kind of always knew that I wanted to be a teacher, but my experience with math growing up was, since my dad was a math ed professor, I was kind of, it didn't always come easy to me, but I got a lot of praise as a kid for being good at math. But, I'm so old that when I was a kid, that math was taught very, very traditionally. And I would consider myself like a shining star, like a success of that system. I was really good at it. I got good grades. And despite that, I think that I was a math failure because I got good grades, and that was kind of the goal of the system, was to get good grades, but I didn't really know anything. You know what I mean? Like I could get answers, but I didn't know what those answers meant. I didn't know how those answers connected to other things. I couldn't apply it. Like I would get, the only points I would miss on a test would be like from the word problems. I'd miss some points here or there because I didn't really understand what was happening. You know what I mean? And so even though I would consider myself, or I think the system would have considered me a success, I really don't think I was. And I think that's a pretty damning indictment on the system that, people who are getting good grades but don't really know anything, that's a problem. And I remember one time in college, I had this professor this is for a pretty high level math class. There were these two classes that were kind of well known in the department to be the ones that students really struggled on. And so for this one, I was really kind of nervous. And the professor said if you had an A going into the final, you didn't have to take the final. And so I was like, just let me get the A going into the final because this class is so hard. So somehow I had an A going into the final. And again, I had no idea what the class was about. I was just kind of doing problems and, repeating the algorithms and, doing problems, but I just didn't know what anything meant. And so I didn't have to take the final, but my roommate, who became a math major, he was taking it. And so I went in to kind of, talk it over with him. And, I started taking the test and I had no idea what anything was. And so after about 15 or 20 minutes, I went to turn in the test. And the professor just looked at me and he was like, I think he realized like the mistake that he made. And he's like, you can't turn it in, go back and work on it. And I was just like, oh no. And so, I went back and spent more time on it, and it didn't help me. I didn't know anything else, and so I always wondered if that professor rethought his policy after that, because a student should not be able to get an A in your course and not have not know anything. But that's kind of what I think that system, that old school kind of system produced, and unfortunately that system is still pretty pervasive, I think, in a lot of schools in the United States for math.
So let's jump into our first topic. So access versus opportunity. So there's a recent study that was conducted in the summer that showed that teachers cover significantly less algebra material in classes that are predominantly Black students compared to their counterpart white peers or schools that had no racial minority. So the analytic sample was comprised of 8th grade algebra classrooms in 111 schools across the country, with 9 schools that are predominantly Black, 20 that are predominantly Latinx, and 82 schools that are not predominantly minority. Now, algebra is considered the bridge between basic and more advanced mathematics. And I know algebra is usually taught in freshman year of high school, with the recent push being to start introducing it as middle school to prepare students for more advanced mathematics in high school. The goal behind this, of introducing algebra in middle school, is to have students take an interest in math and having that algebra foundation, which would hopefully lead to pathways in careers such as science, technology, engineering, and business. So how important is algebra? I know you taught algebra in high school for several years in Orange County and Long Beach.
Well, I think algebra is important, but I just don't think the way it's taught in many American classrooms right now reflects the way that it's important. And I think too often algebra is used as a form of gatekeeping, which is, really especially pernicious because of the effect that it has on students from excluded identities. And I guess I'm, really aging myself here, but when I moved to California in 2006, there was at that point, like algebra in 8th grade, like there was this big argument about whether that should be mandatory to teach algebra in 8th grade. And the kind of conventional wisdom, I'm using air quotes there because it doesn't seem very wise to me, but the idea was that if we want kids to be ready to do algebra, let's give it to them earlier, which is just like the dumbest thing I can think of. That's like saying, all right, well, we've got these, 3-year-olds, and if we want them to be able to walk better, let's make them go up, these flights of stairs and practice walking on flights of stairs, that in which the stairs are too large for their little legs to climb up. You know what I mean? Like, the average, brain doesn't finish developing the frontal lobe of its neocortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for abstract thought. That part of the brain doesn't finish developing for most people until they're 22 or 23. And yet, we're teaching algebra, which is, by nature an abstract concept, to, 8th graders, which, who are 13 years old. So I was so against that. And, seeing on the front lines, just, the damage that's been done. I started teaching in the year 2000, and things have not changed much over the 20 years. Every year I keep seeing students coming to me, that have, huge holes in their mathematical understanding. And, I hope that I'm not coming across as blaming the teachers. I don't blame the teachers. I just think the system is very poorly constructed, to help prepare students for success. students should not have to do abstract thought when their brain is not capable of that. Now, I'm not saying that they can't handle some algebraic concepts, but I do think that idea was really, really misguided. You can't just, why not take that, one step further and say, all right, well, calculus is important. We want all students to be able to do calculus. Let's have to do calculus at that age. You know what I mean? Like, there's a time and a place for everything. And I think in math, it's really important to make sure you understand, those key fundamental ideas. And that doesn't mean that we just give kids, worksheets and drill. Like, that's not what's important. Like, I think one of the most important things in math that's lacking today is a sense of connection and understanding how ideas connect to each other. And too often, mathematics is taught as a set of discrete subjects and these separate things. Just the name Algebra 1, geometry, Algebra 2 is kind of a joke. Like, why is algebra coming in between, Algebra 1 and 2? And even more so, why do we even have classes called Algebra 1? Like, it's not like in the real world, there's a problem and it's like, oh, this is an algebra problem, or, this is categorized as this. It's just a problem. And so I wish we would kind of approach our curricula the same way and view things as these interconnected ideas, and taught them that way so that students would understand the connections between things. I think too often we teach things in isolation and students don't really, they understand things in isolation. And therefore, when you leave that really isolated context, they don't know how to apply it. And what they've learned isn't very meaningful. So to get back to the question, I think that, we want to introduce algebraic ideas in middle school. I think that algebra is important, but I just don't think the way that it's being taught right now is the greatest for students, on a whole, I'm sure I know there are a lot of places that are doing a really good job, but I just think as a whole, it's not a great job. And you brought up, minorities and how, math is taught. I think that's really problematic because I think classes like Algebra 1 are used as a form of gatekeeping, where, they'll test students and then, oh, you're not ready for this. So, it gives schools an excuse to start tracking students, which I think is really dangerous. And, we all know that when tracking happens, that's going to, benefit white kids, and it's going to disadvantage excluded identities. So I think that that's one of the really dangerous things about the way that algebra is used as like a wedge, to divide groups.
So in high school, you have different levels of algebra, with some of the examples being Algebra 1 and 2, and you even have combined classes of algebra and trigonometry. And I know Algebra 1 is meant to focus more on solving equations, linear and quadratic functions, and even graphing roots and their inverses. Algebra 2 is much more advanced, and it's often associated with being considered a college level course. And I remember learning composite functions and much more abstract concepts back when I took it. Can you explain to the listeners what the difference is between the different types of algebra? You having taught all three subjects.
I don't know. I don't want to break your question, but I would kind of just ask, what's the point? You know what I mean? What is the point of all these classes? I don't think there's a point in separating them the way they're traditionally separated. They have that, separation like you talked about. But I think that kind of, the function, are you asking what is the role of these classes, or what are the struggles that students have across the different levels? How do you want to answer that question?
So why exactly? So why separate between Algebra 1 and then now Algebra 2? And then I know sometimes even in other schools, there's a joke that the order of math goes from Algebra 1, then you have geometry, then Algebra 2, and it's weird the way to have it. And I know geometry is meant to help introduce more rigid logical thinking and process needing for more abstract concept in Algebra 2. But why this order? Why is it taught this way?
Well, that's a great question. And I think the word you use, joke, pretty accurately describes it. It is a joke. If there's any math teachers that are listening to this podcast, if you have not read Paul Lockhart's famous essay called A Mathematician's Lament, please Google Paul Lockhart, A Mathematician's Lament. It is such a brilliant essay. And I remember the first time I read it, I was nodding so hard, I felt like my neck was going to snap off. It was it was like a choir of, celestial angels descended from the heavens and just sang to me. It was so beautiful. And the first thing I actually read from that was the last 2 pages, in which he kind of does a breakdown of, what the sequence of high school really is. And I don't know who decided that there should be things like Algebra 1 and then Algebra 2. And then for some reason, we're going to put geometry in the middle of it. Lockhart kind of famously takes geometry to task even more than everything else in that essay. I try to read that essay like once a year, by the way, to just kind of reinvigorate me when it comes to what the purpose, where my passion is. I'm just going to read here what he says about geometry, because I think it's especially kind of poignant. He says, isolated from the rest of the curriculum, the course of geometry will raise the hopes of students who wish to engage in meaningful mathematical activity and then dash them. Clumsy and distracting notation will be introduced, and no pains will be spared to make the simple seem complicated. The goal of this course is to eradicate any last remaining vestiges of natural mathematical intuition in preparation for Algebra 2. And then he says, why geometry occurs between Algebra 1 and its sequel remains a mystery. I think that someone would say those things. I guess I would be really interested in completely blowing up the system and just ask, what is it that we want students to learn about mathematics? Why is it important to learn math? And when I ask people that question, like I said, both my parents are teachers. And so whenever I'm at, like a birthday party for my kids or at some place, meeting new people, that's one of the things I love to ask is how do you use math in your life? And what can I teach my students, that would help better prepare them for your job? And Albert, nobody ever says, oh, well, you should definitely teach them more rational functions, or you should definitely teach them more about the quadratic formula, or, factoring multi-term polynomials, or, you should teach them about the properties of chords in a circle, or inscribed in angles. And, like nobody ever says any of that stuff. And I feel like so often that's what we teach. And math has just become this series of discrete, disconnected ideas. There's 155 standards in Common Core high school math. And I would just say so many of those are completely unnecessary. What we need to teach students is how to think. And I think I would say go into any high school and ask the students, why is math important? Why is it important that you take this class? And whenever I ask students, because I love asking young people that question, and they always say the same things. They say, well, you need to be able to balance a checkbook, or, write checks, or you need to know how to compute change, so you don't get ripped off when you go to the store. And you need to know how to make investments and stuff. But the funny thing is, we don't learn that in school. You know what I mean? I mean, they might do some of the change stuff in elementary school, but we actually don't even teach kids a lot of those financial things in math. So it seems like the purpose of math has become to give kids these various hoops to jump through. And of course, like I said before, that has effects to it, because we know that those hoops are set up to be easier for certain students than others. So I'm sorry for not really answering the question in a straight way. But I can do that if you want, and kind of talk about more of the purpose of learning some of those things. But I guess my answer is that a lot of them just serve the purpose of doing the next thing, which I don't think is a very good purpose. You know what I mean? Like, I think we should always be teaching students mathematics that they will help them in their lives and will help them to be better thinkers. I mean, I think that is the point of mathematics, is to, I think that's what mathematics has to offer, is to help people see patterns, to be able to reason, to be able to communicate that reasoning, to be able to apply what they're learning to make models, to use those models to help them understand the world, to evaluate those models and change those models. But I don't think that's what is taught in school. So I think that the purpose of those classes is different than what I would like. Sorry, I know I'm very opinionated. So
no, that's you're so right. Like one of the main concepts I try and teach in math is like being able to make connections. So going back to the study, the researchers found that where Black students made up 60% or more of the student body, the teachers reported spending an average of 72% of the class covering algebra or more advanced math topics, versus 28% of the class spent more on basic concepts such as fractions and word problems. If we look at the opposite side, on the opposite side of the scope, where schools were majority white, then 82% of the class time was spent on algebra and more advanced concept, with less than 10% on more basic concept. Now, the difference between 72 and 82% may not seem like a lot, but again, let me give you an analogy. Would you rather have $10 or $100? So that's how I can explain the 10% difference. So the study included Latino students, but it was reported that there's not enough significant difference in their course content. So what do you think about these results? Is it surprising? Have you seen this at the schools you've taught?
I don't find that surprising at all. And at the schools that I've taught at, it's varied across the schools. At the first school I taught at, it was the students were so segregated. The school was basically 50% white and 50% black. This is South Carolina 20 years ago when there wasn't a significant Asian or Latinx population. And that was absolutely what I saw. The white students were let me say this, the honors track was predominantly white students. And then the remedial track was predominantly black students. And so the curriculum that the two kind of groups got was, very different. The honors students got a more rigorous curriculum. I think that's so unfortunate. And that was one of the things that I was really glad to learn about when I went to grad school was about heterogeneous grouping and how all students are served better when you take away tracking. Now, I think that leads to, a lot of issues because I think there's a lot of parents out there that want tracking, I'm a white person, so I'll call out white people. I think there's a lot of white people, a lot of white parents especially, that want, their kids to go to school in a way that, we all want to feel like our kids are smart. But unfortunately, I think there's a lot of people that want not just to feel that their kids are smart, but that their kids are better than other people. And so, I've got a friend that I taught with actually. He said at his school, they had regular level, then they had honors level. But then there were so many kids in the honors level that some of the parents were complaining that they wanted more. So they had I don't remember what they called it, but it was like above honors. So they had an honors and then they had a greater than honors. And it just seemed, like they wanted to feel like their kids were doing even more. And I don't know. I wish that teachers were better equipped to know how to teach different levels. That's an area in which I would love to learn more about. But I do feel like, what I've learned about heterogeneous grouping has really helped me to understand that teaching all the students and in the same room at the same time, while that can be challenging, I do think that it benefits everyone. And I think a lot of parents feel really threatened in students. I would say that I was one of those students. I was in honors classes as a kid, and I would have been upset if those honors classes were taken away. But I think I was not mature enough to understand that teaching heterogeneously does not bring down the quote unquote high level of students, but it brings up all students. I think it's a more equitable way of teaching. And I know that when I have students grouped heterogeneously, you have students who struggle with math or who traditionally haven't been good at math, from all races. And then when they're working in a group with students who are quote unquote good at math, whatever that means, I think that it can be hard to manage, and you really have to do a lot of work as a teacher in terms of teaching them how to work together and teaching all students, the importance of explaining your thinking. Because a lot of the quote unquote high achieving, or the students that are good at math, are just good at getting answers quickly, but they're not very good at explaining it. And I think there's a lot of value in being able to explain what you know to other people. I think one of the best things that, someone could do to help some of those good students is to ask them questions about what they know. But I think it's a more equitable, more importantly, it's a more equitable way of teaching for all students.
I know that the whole push of free algebra in middle schools was supposed to be a big success. And the whole idea is that it's better to teach some algebra than no algebra. But the truth is that this is just a matter of access versus opportunity. Because if we look at the data at a national level, we know that Black and Hispanic students make up only a small percentage of the gifted and talented courses. So algebra in 8th grade and more AP or advanced placement courses. The Ed Trust, a nonprofit education advocacy group, found that Black students were underrepresented in 8th grade algebra in 37 out of 41 states based on the national civil rights data. The numbers were even more discouraging in high school, where Black students made up 15% of the population, but only 9% were enrolled in advanced placement math courses like calculus. So taking a quick reflection at your experience teaching math all these years and at all these different levels, have you noticed a disparity like this?
Absolutely. And that kind of matches what I said before. I think that disparity definitely exists. And I think the question is, Albert, what are we going to do to change that? Again, like I said before, I think detracking is one of the important things. It's tough because, when differences start at early levels, the gap kind of widens. You know what I mean? And so when students have inequitable experiences at the elementary level, the achievement gap just widens by the time it gets to middle school, and then it widens again by the time it gets to high school. We're now talking about a really big issue. How do we fix inequity? Because now we're talking about, equity in elementary school and how is that, you know what I mean? Because, we both know that there are schools where students have more privilege than others. Elementary schools, they're so much more, there's so many more elementary schools than middle schools and high schools, elementary schools are more kind of neighborhood schools than high schools, which are more kind of like citywide kind of schools. And so, you have certain elementary schools in neighborhoods with more privilege. Like our own children, I feel pretty guilty that our own children are not going to our neighborhood school. We took advantage as parents. We took advantage of the No Child Left Behind Act to send our own children to a higher performing school. I don't think that should be allowed. And so, by the time our kids finish their schooling, they're going to be, they and their peers will, the data at least says that those students are higher achieving than the kids at our neighborhood schools. Now, that's based on test scores, and, that's a completely different conversation. But I do think that these, we have these cracks, and the cracks just widen with time. And so, I think it's really unfortunate, that these differences exist. And one of the most fascinating things I've read about education is factors that predict future salary and how those factors change over time. There's many factors that predict the future salary of a student, like reading lexile, SAT score, GPA, vocabulary, stuff like that. But which of those factors, or what factor do you think is most closely correlated with future income?
Which one?
Well, I was kind of, I can't remember where the study was done, so I apologize for that. But what I thought was interesting was, for my parents' generation, the factor that most correlated with future income was your father's income. And of course, that makes sense. Unfortunately, that makes sense. That it's nothing about your ability. It's just about, family money. But by the time my generation were students, the factor that most correlated with future income was your mathematical ability. And I see that as such a, like I said earlier, it's a form of gatekeeping. And people that can't do math, if you take that off the table, and you just, like in California, you only need 2 math classes to graduate. And so, there's students that are like, they've had negative math experiences in middle school and high school, and they only take those 2 classes they need to graduate. And then, they go to college, and, if they only have 2 math classes in high school, they're probably not going to take a ton in college. And then, what are your options? Obviously there's a lot of great options there, but if you're removing math options, the options that you're removing are really high paying jobs. You know what I mean? Like, if you think about, high-paying jobs that are out there, now I'm not saying they're all mathematical jobs, but they're jobs where being able to problem solve and think mathematically and communicate and reason are really important. And so, unfortunately, for a lot of our students, and especially for a lot of excluded identities, those opportunities are not there for them.
So there's the high profile initiatives to push for algebra for all eighth graders wasn't as successful as we would have wished. The California Department of Education found that students who passed eighth grade algebra didn't exactly correlate to the student taking and succeeding in more advanced math courses in high school. In fact, there was another study in California from 2015 that found that high enrollments in middle school algebra was actually linked to drops in student scores for state math testing. What this revealed was, yes, these students of color may have been enrolled in algebra courses, but they were not well prepared for the more advanced algebra and math courses in high schools. So these students could be getting A's in the pre-algebra middle school courses, but what happened was when they moved on to the high school and to these more advanced math courses, then all of a sudden they felt like they didn't belong or like they weren't smart enough because they weren't well prepared, eventually leading them to fail these courses. At the schools you've worked at, what program and what resources do they have for students who are struggling with math?
Oh man, that is such a great question. Well, the short answer is that I don't think there are a lot of really good resources for students who are struggling in math. But to go back to what you said, that absolutely matches what I have seen over the last 20 years, which is, we can increase, we can say everybody's going to take algebra in eighth grade. But if a student's not ready for algebra in eighth grade, all you're doing is, you're just teaching them to hate math. And unfortunately, I think that's, the experience of most Americans. When I tell other adults that I'm a math teacher, the most common response I get is a wince. They're like, "Oh, I'm sorry. That must suck. Wait, you teach high school math? Oh man, that must suck." You know what I mean? Like people have these overwhelming negative experiences with math, and that does not bode well for our country. You know what I mean? That's not good for us if that's how most people react. Now, of course, that's not how everybody reacts, but that's not good. And so we need to be doing more to change students' perceptions of math and the way they feel about math. But usually what happens in my experience is that, if you're not good in math in elementary school, then of course that's not going to very often get better in middle school. Usually it's only going to be exacerbated. Now, luckily we do have some awesome middle school elementary teachers that are middle school math teachers that turn that around and, change students' lives, for the better with math. And that's awesome. But there's a lot of cases, where the middle school teachers are, just doing the best they can too. And, they have students who come to them with, that don't know a lot of the stuff that they were supposed to learn in elementary school. And, again, it's not the elementary school teacher's fault, but I don't think that we as a country are very good at at helping students that come to us with low skills in these areas. One of the most common, resources that I've been around in my time are these various softwares like Alex. Have you ever heard of that? ALEKS.
No.
I think now there's iReady. There's these diagnostic tools and, these online things, and they're great at producing data. But I just don't think they're great at instruction. You know what I mean? Like they get kids on these modules and doing these, lessons, but the students, again, it's not really rich mathematics. And I think that's like really at the heart of everything is what kind of rich mathematics are we giving our students? Frankly, I don't think we give rich mathematics enough to high achieving kids. But they definitely get more exposure to rich mathematics, than students who, have traditionally not been, successful at math. And so, unfortunately that's, more often than not, students of excluded identities. And so I think just kind of sitting these kids in front of, software and having that teach them stuff is not very meaningful because a lot of times it teaches them skills in isolation. All these software that I've seen, it's like, all right, today we're going to do multiplying fractions, and it'll like have, a car and you do a math problem and it makes the car go and you're trying to race the car, or like, it gives you some avatar. And if you get enough problems right, you get to put a new hat on the avatar, or you get to buy sunglasses for it, or something, you earn some currency in the game to buy things for it. And unfortunately, I think what it does is it kind of teaches kids that math is not something that's meaningful in your life, that we have to leverage these, we have to gamify mathematics in order to make it fun. And I don't think it's very fun, to be honest. And I don't think most kids even find it fun. And unfortunately, I think that's what a lot of students that struggle are given, are these programs that don't end up with a lot of rich mathematics. So I wish that we had better resources for those students. I think what those students need is if they come to, for example, right now I teach freshmen, and I have freshmen every year that come not knowing, whatever you want to, name from elementary school and middle school, that don't know their times tables or don't know how to add or subtract fractions or whatever. And, not knowing those basic skills, hurts them, when it comes to the stuff that I'm expected to teach them for high school. But I think what is most often needed is smaller class sizes for those students that are struggling. But again, what are you going to do? Even at my school, we have had conversations about, creating classes just for those students, essentially tracking them, which, I just don't feel good about that. You know what I mean? But by the time they get to high school, they're usually so separated. Do you know what I mean? Like, we have some ninth graders that are taking geometry, or even, like the Algebra 2 equivalent, our third year math class. So we have some students in a third year high school math class, and we still have a lot of students that aren't even ready for their first year class. So what do we do there? How do we fix that problem? I wish I had the answer to that, but I don't.
So there are other factors to take in consideration, such as schools with less resources, like Title I schools, even one that don't have enough funding for better math curriculum and materials, and also hiring less experienced teachers, which is fine in the beginning. But again, the school should be pushing to promote professional development and furthering the teacher's education. And there's also like what you said earlier, there's the stigma that just math isn't fun. If we were to eliminate all these factors, there's still the problem that majority Black schools still cover significantly less algebra than compared to schools where Black and Latino students made up a smaller portion of the class. So what do you think this wake-up call is for? Is it teachers, school districts, legislators?
I think the wake-up call is for everyone. We all need to, do what we can to help fix the problem. I do have a hard time blaming teachers for this. I mean, what are we supposed to do? Our training is to, teach the students in front of us. So I think that it's more of an issue for districts and policymakers to fix this problem. And teachers just want to teach students. You know what I mean? And so the schools that I've been at, when we talk about, students that come to us with deficiencies, a lot of teachers, I think, they just want to help, so they're like, all right, let's create a special class for these, freshmen who really need, 7th and 8th grade math skills. Or 5th and 6th grade, 7th and 8th grade math skills. And because they just want to help the student. And I want to do that too. I have an instinct to do that too. And as soon as we do that though, we're kind of tracking. So I don't know. I would love to see some really, outside the box thinking. I know some schools do like double block math, which is, it sounds good in theory, right? Like if the kids are behind, let's give them twice as much math. But Albert, how do you think that goes in reality? You know what I mean? Like if you give kids, all right, you're not good at math. Well, guess what you're getting now, kids? You're getting twice as much math. And so instead of kind of being creative with it, what essentially happens is they say, all right, now we've got twice as much time to do math. Well, if you're a kid that doesn't like math, how's that going to go for you? You know what I mean? How do you think you're going to feel about that? And so I would love to see some creative ways of solving that. Like, all right, let's have 2 math classes, but one of them is going to be your normal math, your grade level math class. Because, the little bit that I know about remediating students, a little bit that I know, and I wish I knew a lot more, but the little bit that I know says that what's important is to teach them as much grade level stuff as you can and to remediate the stuff from previous grades in the current grade level, which is, of course, incredibly hard for the teacher. But, the people who I trust and follow with regards to math equity, that's what they say. So I'm going with that. But what if the other math class could be something else? And what I'm not suggesting is a basic skills class, but just an opportunity to foster a love of math and to do more outside the box creative math. Mathematical modeling, I think, is one of the most beautiful aspects of math, and it's one of my favorite things to teach. And it's one of the things that students come the most alive about talking. And students who have been traditionally excluded from math classes because they don't have some of that traditional background stuff still have the knowledge and understanding of the world outside of classrooms that helps them to excel in mathematical modeling. And that's one of the cool things as a math teacher. One of the reasons why I love being a math teacher is because just frankly the expectations are so low. When students enter my class on the first day, I have so many students. The first assignment I give them is an assignment called mathematical autobiography, where they tell me what their kind of history with math is, and it would just, Albert, it would break your heart to read the number of times that students say, I've never been good at math ever since third grade when that times test, or, this one time in fifth grade, the teacher called on me and I didn't know how to do this. And all the other kids knew this, or, the teacher, said, well, you're in fifth grade and you don't even know your times tables, or, ever since fractions, I've never understood fractions. And so I've always been bad at math ever since that. Or, just so many things. And I can't tell you how many students I get that tell me they're not math people. And how many parents, frankly, that will say, my child's not a math kid. That's just so heartbreaking. And so I love teaching math in a different way and having curricula that shows students that there's more to math than just doing exercises in a textbook, and solving equations and getting the answer. But, we can reason about the world. We can, use our knowledge of the world outside of classrooms to make sense of things, and then think mathematically and reason mathematically. That was a very, very long answer to your question.
No, it's good. It's good. I mean, the whole thing about if students don't like math, and all right, let's give them double math. Always reminds me of the situation where, a child doesn't want to eat their green and veggies, and the mom says, all right, you don't want to eat this? Here's 2 plates. And it's obviously going to make them dislike eating the greens and veggies. But one of the recommendations or first steps in trying to solve this inequality is by having teachers from the whole district collaborate and compare how much and how they're teaching math or algebra. And they would delve into what exactly materials they're using, how they're covering it, and how much they're covering. So, Jeremy, even at a university level, how important is it to collaborate with other teachers on the same content material?
Well, I just want to be clear. So I didn't teach math at the university level. I taught math teachers at the university level. So I taught at UCI and their CalTeach program, which is a program for math majors math majors who want to become math teachers. But I think it's incredibly important to collaborate with other teachers. And I mean, frankly, I think that's something that I've struggled at in my career. As you can tell, I'm a very opinionated person. And I think sometimes that has made it hard for others, to work with other people. And it's something that I've learned as I've gotten older. It's so important to any teacher out there to develop a relationship or a community of people with whom you can collaborate. Because I've been in that boat where I'm just doing it all myself. And man, our analogy from earlier about just trying to keep your head above water is so apropos there. If you're with other people, you can all kind of swim together, make a boat together. It'll be a lot of work, but once you get that boat going, it can be a great resource for everybody. I think it is so important. And sometimes, teachers are not going to have that on their school site. There's schools where, a teacher might be by themselves, and I've had that happen before where, you're just the only one. Earlier in my career, I was at a school, and there were so many math teachers, and a lot of them were later in their career. And one of them even took me out to dinner one night, and he said, hey, I see all this new stuff you're doing. Tell me more about it. And I did. And he was like, man, this sounds really interesting, but I'll just be honest with you. I'm going to retire in 2 years. And that's too much work for me to do, at this point in my career, which is really just kind of heartbreaking. I think a lot of teachers are just doing the best they can. And if you don't know, then you don't know. And when I first started teaching Algebra, I didn't know anything about teaching really. I taught just the way that my teachers taught me, which was pretty terribly, just very, very traditionally. You know what I mean? Again, and not to talk badly about my teachers. They were doing the best that they could, but they were taught like their teachers taught them. And I think unfortunately what that kind of results in is that a lot of math classes now are taught not that dissimilar to the way they were 150 years ago. And that's not what our students should be doing. Now, there are a lot of really awesome, innovative math teachers. And if anybody hasn't heard of the math Twitter blogosphere, I would encourage you to Google MTBOS, math Twitter blogosphere, and learn more about that, or just go to hashtag MTBOS. And there's this beautiful community of teachers that are working together to create this, really cool community. And so even if you are at a school by yourself, where you don't have other teachers that are as interested as you are in reforming the way your subject is taught, I would encourage them to go online and to seek community, because I think that's so important.
So with that being said, let's jump into our second topic, and that's about changing the way we teach math during this pandemic. So there are three questions we should look at when talking about equity in math classes during the pandemic. The first is the whole structure consideration. So during brick and mortar or in-class teaching, we always have differentiated heterogeneous groups for intervention. So we have separate groups depending on the students' math abilities. But however, how do we do this during the pandemic when teachers are just spread out so thin?
Are you talking about breakout rooms and stuff like that?
Yeah, just, breakout rooms and just, how do you address all the different levels of students?
Well, like I said, I believe very strongly in heterogeneous grouping, which is, putting all students together regardless of their ability levels. And so I just use the randomizer on Zoom and put the kids in groups. I do try to keep them in their groups for a couple weeks so they can, build relationships with each other. And, in groups, you're going to have students of different abilities. You're going to have students who have historically been good at math and students who have historically not been very good at math. But I think it's really important that they work together. It just is even more hard. I mean, it's hard enough doing that in the classroom, when we're all on campus together. It's even more hard during a pandemic. So many of my students, as I'm sure many teachers out there, so many of my students have their screens on mute, their video on mute, whether by choice or by necessity, and their audio on mute as well. And so it's really, really hard to get the students to engage meaningfully. And so I wish I had more suggestions for teachers. I've been trying to encourage my students to turn their cameras on when they can. Again, I've got a lot of students who they can't for various reasons. Like their Wi-Fi is really sketchy, or they're in a room with three siblings, and it's chaos, or they're they don't want their classmates to see what their house or living conditions look like, or for whatever reason. I've just been trying to motivate my students to kind of come out of their shells, because I do have some students that are like, oh, my hair's bad today, or I haven't put my makeup on, and so that is, it's kind of hard for me as a teacher. I think that's one of the areas that I've been struggling in, is differentiating between students who are not participating because they don't have the ability to, or they just don't feel like it. I feel like I don't have any answers when it comes to advice during the pandemic. I mean, right now I'm doing well, but August was really rough for me, and many either ended in tears or just like asked myself, what am I doing? As I close my laptop at 2:30 a.m. and just like wake up to do it all again the next day. That has just been way, way too common. And I'm sure there's so many others that are going through similar situations.
So then the second category is teaching practices. So there's the push for more frequent formative assessments to track how students are learning, and they want to take the data and then able to make adjustments. So, still be pushing for higher thinking math concepts with the whole low floor, high ceiling, in which students of any math level can step onto this platform and attempt the problems. And the high ceiling part is for students with more advanced concepts and a better grasp on it. They can still take this problem and take it further to the next level with a high ceiling. So resources like math tasks and questioning strategies and formative assessments, are more important than ever. For yourself, what teaching strategies have worked best for you during this pandemic? I know you said you have the breakout rooms, but what else have you tried?
I feel so limited. Breakout rooms, I've had really mixed success with those. Some of my groups are working really, really well. And some of the students like going into those breakout rooms. They feel like when they're in the whole class Zoom that everybody's staring at their screen, and that's why they have their screen off. And they feel like when they can go into the breakout rooms that they can kind of relax and share their screen. But I've really been struggling with that. In the spring, a colleague and I, who I worked really well with, we did this Desmos project. Are you familiar with Desmos?
No.
It's an online math, essentially graphing calculator type situation where you can graph stuff. And so, nothing about the quarantine is good, and nothing about distance teaching is good. But I was just, we were kind of thinking like, well, if the students have to engage in class through a screen, let's see if we can leverage it somehow. So we spent a long time creating a lot of resources for this Desmos math art project, where they use graphs. They graph all these different functions, and they use the functions to make pictures. And so, I feel like we had some small success in that. It was just so hard to get a lot of the kids to participate in the spring. So I kind of feel like that went, about as well as it could have, considering the circumstances. To be honest, though, I don't really know that much about teaching. I don't know what I've learned about teaching strategies when it comes to teaching math. I think the bigger thing for me has been motivation strategies, and, just trying to motivate my students, which I don't think I've been successful, with a lot of students, frankly. But I think the biggest mistake that I made in the spring was feeling the pressure of time and not feeling the pressure of relationships. So, for example, our school, we have 90-minute classes that meet every other day. And during the pandemic, in the spring, we went to 1 hour a day, every other day still. And so, my immediate thought was like, oh man, I've got a third less time. We got half an hour every class that is gone. And not only that, but an hour through Zoom is not the same as an hour in person. It's just not. It's the multiplier there is definitely less than one. And so the mistake that I made was just kind of trying to keep going and going and going and teaching, and just and I think one of my strengths as a teacher is really forming really strong relationships with my students and getting to know them as people and having them get to know me, and really leaning on the strength of that relationship to tie very closely to motivation. I feel like I'm pretty good at motivating a lot of students, obviously not all students, but a lot of students. And it's so hard in the pandemic to do that, because I just feel like the students, it's hard for us, we're adults, right? And this is hard for everybody, but it's so hard on the students, especially the seniors. I feel like I see the most depression and motivation struggles in seniors. But with I've got freshmen this year, so obviously they didn't go to our school last year, and so I met them through Zoom. Whereas most of my seniors, I either taught them before, or I knew of them, or I'd seen them around campus. But the freshmen, I'm meeting through Zoom. And it's funny, I've got two classes of freshmen, Albert, and one of them they're just so alive. They're electric. Every day they're like blowing up the chat. They just have all this energy. And a good chunk of the cameras are on, and they're really excited, and I'm able to joke around with them, and they're just having a lot of fun. And it's of course it's not the same as being in person, but there's been some times in the last week or two where it's like, man, this is I feel like I have a relationship with them. And I can joke around with them. I'm still not able to kind of push and prod and use those really personal relationships to kind of to motivate students and talk to the ones that are really struggling. It's really hard to kind of you can't really have those one-on-one conversations when you've got all the students staring at you. You know what I mean? But as for the class as a whole, I feel like I've been able to kind of relate to them. Whereas one of my other classes, the overwhelming majority of the cameras are off, like almost all of them. And, there's not as much interaction. And I try to, joke with them and kind of relate to them. And I've been showing them a lot of embarrassing pictures of me when I was younger. And they seem to appreciate that. So I've been trying that. So if any teachers out there have pictures of themselves when they were your students' age, that always is very exciting for the students, especially if they're more humiliating or embarrassing. The students love that. And I mean, if I can embarrass myself if that's what it takes to motivate my students, then I am happy to do that. But it's definitely been a struggle I don't know that I have strategies that have worked. Teaching strategies, is what you asked for. I don't know that I have that, but I think motivation strategies is what I think is important.
And then the last category is advocacy, in which educators should be advocating for not settling for the bare minimum. We should be challenging our students, and also outside the classroom with budgeting and curriculum materials and professional development. What are some ways that a teacher can advocate for better equity?
Oh man, I don't know, Albert. I mean, who listens to teachers? What voice do we really have? We have a voice, but I wish I felt more positive about that. I think that's for, policymakers. I don't know, man. I wish I had answers there. I feel like that is definitely not a strength of mine. I think, forming community is important. I don't think teachers, even with the amplification of the era that we live in, I think it's something where we have to come together and in community, advocate. Teachers unions are completely, I wish we could use teacher unions for, in that way or leverage them somehow. I wish I had an answer. I'm afraid I'm kind of flummoxed on this one. I don't know what to say.
Well, I definitely agree with you about community. Like even at my school, being part of the family outreach or community outreach programs and letting them know, be aware of all the issues that's going on and what they can vote on, talk to the local leaders. So that's one thing I definitely recommend. And as we wrap this episode up, I want to say, thank you to our guest, Jeremy. Is there any advice you would give out to new teachers or, people just even thinking about entering the education field, especially during this pandemic?
Oh, man. I can't imagine what it's like to be a new teacher right now. Like I said, I started teaching 20 years ago, and this has been just so hard on me. So I can't imagine what it's like, for people that are just starting out. I think the most important thing is to have self-care, find ways to energize yourself and to take care of yourself, because if you're not at your best, then what good can you be for your students? I feel like we're all just trying to survive right now. And so whatever can kind of help you to survive the most. But I guess maybe if I can, something just came to me. I don't know about other teachers, but right now I'm definitely feeling like I'm in this pattern. We've been doing this now for almost 2 months, and I feel like I'm in this pattern of every day kind of going through the same kind of steps. And I think it's important to just, and this goes for, pandemic or no pandemic. I think it's important every now and then to just stop and just talk to your students on, just kind of put the chalk down, put the whiteboard marker down or close the laptop for a second and just look your students in the eye and, just say, how's it going? What can I do? How can I be a better teacher? What is it that, you need? And I mean, if you're going to get honest answers for students, you really have to develop a relationship beforehand. You can't just ask that question, obviously, and expect students to feel comfortable being honest with you. And so I think that's something I'm really proud of as a teacher, is my ability to not just ask for feedback, but really communicate to the students that I need their feedback, to the point where, they tell me stuff that is really brutally honest, and that sometimes hurts. But to let them know that that's what I want. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think my students would tell me as much if they didn't know that they could trust me to accept that information. You know what I mean? And so, it's been really good on the days where I'm just like, all right, let's just talk for 15 minutes, about your life. And one of my colleagues is really, really great at, asking a lot of, completely non-math questions, just really kind of personal stuff to get a sense of how the kids are doing. And she really, connects with them on that level in a way that's really beautiful and inspiring to me. She's only in her, third year of teaching, and I've learned so much from her. And I think that that's really important, to just kind of talk to your students in that way, and just forget about the curriculum for a couple minutes and see where they're at and what they need, because, we can do whatever we want, with content, but if they're not at a place where emotionally, mentally, physically, where they can accept that, or if they can, deal with it, then it doesn't matter how fast or how much we teach them or how good our lesson is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All right. As we wrap this episode up, I want to say thank you to our guest, Jeremy Hansuvadha, and most importantly, you, the listeners. See you next time.